or an offshoot of it, whatever, what it is, what it does, and
Senator, thank you.
what you know about best practices.
I am Bob Brown, Robert Brown, formerly from the National Institute of Corrections. I'm Senior Deputy Director there. And I'm pleased to be here. I'm home again in some respects. I spent a lot of time in Southern California. Now, I know that's not really a part of California. That's below the Tehachapi Mountains, but I did spend quite a bit of time there. That's where I did my undergraduate and graduate work. And so it's nice to be home again. When people ask me, do you miss Colorado? Because I was chief of the National Institute of Corrections Academy for 15 years. No, but I miss Huntington Beach dearly, because that's where I spent a lot of my formative years. But I'm pleased to be here. The National Institute of Corrections is a part of the Federal Bureau of Prisons, and we're, as former Director Samuels would say, we are at kind of arm's length. When he said we're at arm's length, we did a report on restricted housing, which was a somewhat critical report on how the Federal Bureau of Prisons uses restricted housing. It's a necessary tool that needs to be used, but we had somehow gotten used to behaving in ways that probably weren't in the best interest of our inmate population. We had overused a strategy. Still needs to be there, but we overused it. And we've done some other work as well on behalf of Congress, the Senate, as well as the House. And we are there to assist and help state and local corrections, as well as the Federal Bureau of Prisons as it administers its correctional institutions. And it's a big system. Some of you have said, does California compare to anybody else? Well, the Federal Bureau of Prisons has 122 institutions located throughout the country. A population is over 200,000, and we face many of the same issues and problems, challenges that you all face. I'm fascinated by some notes that I've penned here on some of my information, and I'll try to address some of the issues that some of you have raised in your questions to other panel members. I would start this way, and I'm going to send along to you Corrections, Learning, and Performance, a Vision for the 21st Century. It's a report that we did some time ago because I noted that the National Institute of Corrections was kind of staid and stale and old in terms of some of the way that we've done training. And we need to make some improvements there. The federal government needs to make some, Federal Bureau of Prisons needs to make changes. We all need to make changes. I have empathy for your secretary. I have empathy for Stacy. You'll have to forgive me if I don't get your title correct, but for Stacy in terms of what she's wrestling with in terms of correctional training, and for the Inspector General as well. And I have wrestled with correctional training for a long time in all over the United States. I'd start it this way and suggest that a former dean of mine, a fellow by the name of Randolph Westerfield at the Marshall School, when he became dean, he made a pronouncement to his faculty. And he said basically, it's not that business training, it's not that an MBA won't serve you well, but for those faculty that are here, he said, you're not going to learn much by looking at the United States. You need to look elsewhere. And Senator, you have said that Norway is an example. Sweden is another example where there's a lot to be learned internationally. And Randy said this, he said, globalization, technology, those are two things that are going to impact the way in which we do business. In the public sector, those impact how we deal with corrections. Bill Wagenhorn from Motorola said, you know, we've come a long way since the flip charts, blackboards, chalkboards, overheads, extension cords, Proximas even. And yet if you look at some of the way in which we still conduct training, it's still the way in which we conduct training. And I'm going to say some things that may astound you, and I don't say that to embarrass anybody, because I would say that the National Institute of Corrections practices some of the same behaviors. But what I would say is that classroom training is not where learning takes place. It is an important foundation, but it is not where the real training that impacts correctional officers, whether they be senior level executives or whether they be correctional officers at the line level. They learn most of what they know in the field. Now, you need to provide them with a foundation, but they learn most of what they know in the field. And so when we talk about supervisors, we talk about coaching and mentoring. That's where things have to change for us, because we can do a great job of teaching people informing them about the skills that they need. However, if they don't get reinforcement in the field, we probably will have little impact on changing performance and behavior. So that's a place that really needs to have a focus, what we do with our supervisors. Because I think the Inspector General said it well when he said, we make a tremendous investment in our correctional officers. We send them to 12 weeks of training. And is there a magic for a particular period of time? Federal Bureau of Prisons trains for 3 weeks. Basic officer training, basic correctional officer training school is 3 weeks long. Missouri and Washington State, it's 4 weeks, 6 weeks. It's 4 weeks with 2 weeks of field training officer, OJT training at the institutions. And so is there a magic for a particular period of time that we spend time training? Probably not. We need to ensure that what we are doing is providing the right skill sets. However, what do we do when they enter the institution? That culture that is there, and it is a culture, and it's significant. And so what I would say to you is that in terms of training, a lot of how we get impact is what we do with the correctional officer once they are under supervision in the field. A little bit about the National Institute of Corrections. We began actually in 1972. You may or may not remember, you may not go back this far, but the Attica riots, we had already, there was already in place a suggestion that we bring together 200 correctional luminaries to look at the field of corrections, because the judiciary was always given its fair share of federal support, and law enforcement was always given its fair share of support from the federal government. Corrections was that poor stepchild at the end that never really got support. And all of a sudden, Governor Rockefeller was on the news, and Russ Oswald was on the news. He was then Director of Corrections for the state of New York, and embarrassed that corrections was not performing well. It was not our best day for corrections. And so the National Institute of Corrections came out of a 1971 Williamsburg conference in which there was a need to improve the state of corrections. And we've made some progress, but we haven't come as far as we need to go at this point. And that was Wagenhorn's position with Motorola. He said, we've made some progress in terms of training, but we've not come as far as we need to go. So we need to more effectively manage our prisons, jails, and community corrections, and that's part of what National Institute of Corrections is about. Our mission really is, we see ourselves as a center for learning, leadership that shapes and advances effective correctional practice. But it's not just a one-time, you get the flu shot in October and then you're set for the rest of the year. That's not the way it goes. It's constant recurrent training. I had the opportunity, you may or may not remember the DC-10 that went down in Iowa, and the pilot of that particular airplane said this about what happened. They lost their hydraulic pressure. Well, you can't fly one of those large jumbo jets if you lose all the hydraulic pressure. And Al Haynes said this. He said, you know, it took teamwork. It took collaboration. It took good communication. It took leave your ego at the door, because when you've got 3 command pilots sitting up in the front 3 seats of that airplane, they can get in each other's way. And he said we had some luck. He said we lost over 100 passengers, but he said we also saved over 100 passengers. And he said we were flying right by the seat of our pants. Our business, if we got to be careful about that. And our business is a dangerous business. We have to recognize that. So part of what the National Institute of Corrections is about is effectively managing prisons and jails, It's managing our community corrections program, which are taking increased emphasis. It's more of an emphasis for us because, as Charles Samuel said a number of years ago, and he was the former director of the Bureau, when he said, you know, reentry is going to be a major part of what we do. And why is that? He said, because 80 to 90% of those that we have incarcerated today will return home. They will come to your communities. Now, can we answer the question, are they better today than they were when they entered this correctional facility? And we've got to work on that. And I watched the 115 wardens at the time sit in the room and look at one another and go, It was probably typified by this question or this issue. I sat at dinner one night with a group of my folks who were coming through an executive excellence program. It's an executive development program from all over the country. And he said, you know, I know how to run a good prison. I know how to run a good jail. But they want so much more from me today. They want me to manage the budget. They want me to respond to stakeholders. They want me to understand politics, not in the large P or large D, large R issue, but the politics of getting things done. And they want me to understand economics and the environment and mentoring and staff development. I think I'll retire. Now, in that class, our current assistant director for HRMD, he was in that class. Our former retired director of corrections, he's retired. Federal Bureau of Prisons, he's retired as well. They saw the challenges differently, and they have worked in their careers to modify and change the direction of corrections. And it answers Warren Bennis's questions. You know, it's about doing the right things. So National Institute of Corrections is here to enhance organization, professional performance in corrections. It's a constant struggle. What's right with training? What's appropriate with training? Leadership and management is always a part of what we do, value-centered principles. I mean, what are the values of the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation? And is that reinforced every day? We know that it needs to be reinforced in the Federal Bureau of Prisons. It needs to be reinforced with the National Institute of Corrections, and it needs to be reinforced here. We have concerns over community, staff, offender safety, some of our other challenges. We are here to improve correctional practices through exploration of trends in public issues. Now, we produce, every year, we have for 2013, 2014, and just hot off the presses is our environmental scan for 2015. This should inform every Department of Corrections future trends. What are the future trends? And it does, but if it's simply a report that ends up on somebody's shelf, it should be read, it should be digested, it should be discussed, it's informed practice. It informs what we ought to be doing strategically for the future of our organization so that we can improve correctional practice. And we should be dedicated to that because the business is changing. It used to be a lot simpler when I first started in the business, and I go all the way back to a point where California had 13 correctional institutions and 17,000 inmates under our custody. And we were talking about, well, wouldn't it be nice if we could close San Quentin? Because we thought that was a thoughtful thing to do. And within less than a decade, we were off and running to an escalating building issue. We can't build our way out of the problem. We can't train our way out of the problem, but there are strategies that we can employ to change the way in which we do business because building is expensive. Federal Bureau of Prisons is a $7 billion business, and as I was walking up the stairs, Allison, tell me if this is correct or incorrect, we were talking about a $10 billion business here, somewhere in that neighborhood. That's what our budget is. That's expensive. And I said that I'd been at a breakfast for business leaders when I was with the University of Southern California for a considerable period of time, and I was at a breakfast meeting, and Senator Burgess talked about that corrections had a budget of about 7%. And I thought to myself, that's out of balance. Because when it goes up that high, it all of a sudden becomes a target of opportunity for other state services that are looking at monies that are disappearing from them and for critical issues, critical social issues. So corrections has to be balanced. We have to enhance our services for improved organizational staff effectiveness, and that's what we're about. So the Federal Bureau of Prisons, National Institute of Corrections, has a group of men and women that are here, and we provide a couple of essential services. We do some training, but a lot of our training today is around capacity building. How can we come out into the field and assist you? Because our work is not, we don't have a constituency in the sense that we do not run a corrections department. However, we can help a corrections department with strategic planning, strategic thinking, capacity building for trainers. We can look at almost any issue that you have, and we have collections of men and women. We have trainers, we have consultants that we can use and we can send out, and we can support and pay for their opportunities to resolve your issues and problems in the field. As you mentioned, some of the state directors, the Senator Lou said something about, what would be a good state that we might take a look at? Well, there probably aren't any states with the kind of complexity and diversity that the state of California has. However, the state of Ohio, under Gary Moore's leadership, has some possibilities for some of the work that he's done in the area of, and I've just now let it go right out of my head. No, in the area of culture work. Gary is probably one of the most active, aggressive state directors who really understands culture work and really employs it on an everyday basis with his executive staff and with all of his wardens. That's a rarity, and that's unusual. Who does effective reentry work? Well, Gary, again, is one of those that does, but who else would I use as a model? Well, there's some work up in Washington State, although, for every positive there is, the Secretary of Corrections in Washington was fired because of a sentence computation issue. The Director of Corrections in Nebraska, he inherited an issue that he uncovered, and he's been fortunate enough to hold on to his job because he's trying to right that ship. Secretary in Wisconsin had a juvenile facility that was in trouble and ended up going back to his Internal Affairs Inspector General position. The issue is that these men and women are trying to do a good job, and in trying to do a good job, there is risk, and sometimes, unfortunately, the political realities of the situation is that, as Chase Reveland has a long time said, and he's been one of your masters here, that Chase Reveland would tell you that the political realities of the situation are sometimes you lose your job, but it's not beyond recognition. So the National Institute of Corrections, what are we doing? We provide training, we provide technical assistance. The technical assistance process, and I talked to the Secretary this morning and said, Scott, all you really have to do is write us a letter. It's a one-page letter. Tell us what your problems are. Tell us what your issues are. We can't solve everything, every issue that you have in the state of California, but we can help with certain priority issues. And we make that available to every state in the United States, and we make it available to every county as well. We've been working with Terry McDonald down in the Los Angeles County with the detention services that she's provided. And we were there extensively a year ago, and we are continuing our work there. And we're in every state. So we are working with states through technical assistance. And the issue with us is that none of those services are paid for by your tax dollars. They are paid for by your federal tax dollars, but they are not paid for by your state tax dollars. And so it's not the reason to call on us, but if you have a legitimate issue that needs to be resolved, and legitimate issues are around issues like affordable care. I don't care what one thinks about the Obama Affordable Care Act, but affordable care is helping correctional agencies provide effective care for inmates, the mentally ill. Senator, you mentioned the mentally ill. It's one of our key challenges in corrections because we seem to be, for jails and prisons, we seem to be the place where we send the mentally ill. Unfortunately, too many of them mentally ill. So we need to figure out those services. Transitioning from prisons to jails. what are the issues, the challenges we face there? We have training programs, but we also have technical assistance there. Offender employment retention, cost containment, evidence-based practice. We're in 10 different states today with evidence-based practice. We have successfully worked in Wisconsin, Virginia, and Indiana, where the states have decided to employ the strategies of evidence-based practice to improve the criminal justice response to the inmate population, reduction of the inmate population in prisons, and moving many of those folks who would have normally been remanded to state custody, we're moving them back to the community effectively. And it's getting a lot of both political support as well as administrative support. We're also in 7 other jurisdictions as well. It's an expensive, it is an expensive program, but a program that by comparison, in terms of what it costs us to incarcerate, it's, we save a lot. We save a lot, and the performance is better, and the outcomes are better. Dosage-based probation, justice-involved women, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex offenders. We started this program. We knew it was risky. It was not very popular within our own institute. And yet when Los Angeles County called and said, do you folks have any information on this population? Because we don't know what to do about that population. And we said, we do. We've begun to look at this issue. Again, what are the environmental trends? What are the trends that exist here socially, technologically, environmentally, economically, criminal justice-wise? What are the issues? And we pay attention to those kinds of things. Post-conviction victim services, prison rape elimination, and organizational culture. I mentioned Gary Moore in Ohio. But he's not the only one. But Gary seems to be the one who is most concerned about this issue. When I talked to some of your staff, Senator, a week ago or so, I said that Apex document, and you have a copy of the Apex document, the cover sheet, and some other information about the Apex document. We are here to work on cultural issues, because until we work hand in hand on those cultural issues, it's as we learned in PREA, and Andy Moss, a colleague of mine, reminds me, you will not reduce prison rape. You will not reduce that until we modify and change some of the cultural issues and aspects that exist. We won't modify and change staff sexual misconduct until we modify some of the cultural issues. But that has to be something that we build a capacity from within. I mean, the Secretary has said he's dedicated to making improvement. The Inspector General has said he's dedicated to it. I'm sure Stacy will come along with that process as well. But changing organizational culture, how do we deal with that issue? So we do training, we do a lot of technical assistance, and we do information services.
Thank you. That's really very, very helpful, and I think it's a good segue. Maybe you could stay here for questions.
Sure.
Because I would like to call up Mike Miner and Chuck Alexander for just our last panel, and maybe observations and feedback about what you've heard and what you see as a future for this discussion. Mr. Alexander, would you like to start as the president of the organization that represents the COs?
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. As introduced, I'm Chuck Alexander, the president of CCPOA. I took some notes in the back as everybody talked, and one thing I want to say is my members cannot get enough training. We have been advocates for training forever. We are the group that increased or petitioned for an increase to the academy, and we are the ones that are the driving force behind getting CPOST reestablished. So we want the training. The only comment, and I'll cut this really short, the only comment, and I think the cleanest comment I can make relative to everything that's been said is money. It all sounds great. We'd sure like to see it, but we don't believe it'll happen because it costs money. And There has not yet been a willingness to spend the money to do what we're talking about in this hearing today. I mean, that's just the facts. We had to shorten our academy as part of an agreement to get C-posts back, and that was about saving money. So I don't know that I can say it any more succinct than unless there's a willingness to provide funding for adequate, actual, face-to-face, real training, we just don't believe it's going to happen.
Okay, thank you. Mike Minor.
Yes, Madam Chair and members, I'll be brief also. I've heard a lot this morning, and I want to thank the Secretary for recognizing the fact that we were able to get out of a federal lawsuit, and more importantly to me is the fact that we are in a better position to serve the youth that's in our care. That's what the lawsuit termination means. And I remember coming into the organization in 2012 as a director, and one of the things I wanted to change was the mantra around the lawsuit, that we were doing things because of lawsuit. And I wanted to change that mantra to we're doing it because it's the right thing to do. And I think today the DJJ is in a better position to boast that. Just very quickly, I think many things that have been said this morning, I think are right on target. I think we can speak from the perspective of implementing such a change, a transformation in an organization. And I think we've done that through, one, developing a clear model and sharing that vision throughout the organization. And I think it's very important to point out we continue to communicate the why. Why do this? Why change? What is the benefit to the employees? And we have to remember that our staff do work in some very challenging environment with a very difficult population on the juvenile side, and I can only put that to scale on the adult side. But it's important that staff understand the why. What is it? What's in it for the staff? Why change the behaviors of thoughts, beliefs, and actions that we have come to know? The other thing I would talk about a little bit is making sure that everyone understand how important they are to the mission. I remember coming into organization as an officer, and at the time it was a California Youth Authority, and there were still remnants of rehabilitation. California was still being looked at as a national model for rehabilitation in the Division of Juvenile Justice. That slowly started to dwindle away as things changed, and we became to the era of get tough on crime, lock them up, nothing works, treatment doesn't work, et cetera. But I think back to that day, and I think back to my time as an entry-level officer, and I can't recall once anyone telling me how important I was to the process. I came to work, I was told where to be, do your job, et cetera. But no one said, clarified the role and how important I was to the mission in rehabilitation, even as a correctional officer. So I think it's important that we echo that every chance we get, and in addition to the mission and vision. And I think the Secretary has really stepped into that mode. I think I've heard him say numerous times the vision in the organization. He's really reaching out to make sure folks understand that. I think the other thing we have to consider is that change takes time, and people are in the organization at all different levels. And we have to approach it from a strength-based approach and identifying where folks are in the organization and then providing them with the training that they need. And then we have to look at what hinders change. Why? Some is out of fear, some is out of our own safety. If we make these changes, if we engage youth or engage inmates differently, are we putting our own safety at risk? And we have to help them understand that it makes the environment safer and not more harmful. Inconsistent messaging. We have to be sure that we convey the message throughout the organization. And the big thing is really, I think, is modeling those expectations throughout the organization, and that starts from the top down. And I think back to when I came into the organization as the director, there were terms being used, evidence-based practices, cognitive behavior theory, trauma-focused CBT, all these things. They were actually foreign to me because that's not my background. So I think creating an environment where it's okay for people to say, I don't know, and I'm willing to learn is huge. And I think we've done so in the Division of Juvenile Justice to set those expectations and open up the door for folks to embrace new concepts and ideas. And then modeling that again. As we talked about training, and I agree that training is very important, and I agree with several comments made from several of the earlier speakers regarding training. Training without coaching is inept. We have to have on-the-ground coaching. You have to have coaching, and you have to have people out there that understand. I think about some of the fatal flaws I made as director, and about 15 months ago, we were struggling as administration to determine why aren't the dots connecting? We're giving folks this training, we're talking to them about it, but we had missed one very important piece. We didn't train the upper-level management and supervisors to know what the staff was expected to do. We're training the line-level staff, holding them to these expectations, but the supervisors, managers, and executive staff, we don't know what they're looking at. We don't know what they should be doing, so how can we coach and mentor? So we had to flip that. We had to go back, and with some very difficult growing pains for the managers and supervisors, but they're better for it today because they had to go through the interventions themselves, stand up in front of the staff and youth, and deliver those interventions. Now, can you imagine how embarrassing that was for some folks? But it made them better for it, and today we're a better organization for it. So we have to look for those fatal flaws that hinder us versus those things that push us forward. And that's what quality assurance comes in at. And I think you have to have strong quality assurance processes in order to maintain the sustainability. And in doing so, you start looking at those things internally. You start looking at whether force is reduced. You start to look at increased school attendance, increased attendance into your voc shops. You start looking at inmates or youth complaints declining. You start looking at violence among individuals and groups, staff assaults. And then you start looking at increased behavior of the wards, of the youth, of the inmates. I think those things are important. We've built strong quality assurance components to our program to ensure that we are meeting the mark. Now we're moving to the QI process. We're looking at quality improvement. Not so much now are these things happening, but they happen in a way they're designed to happen to maintain fidelity to the model. Looking at best practices, we continue to look at those things. I could go on and talk to you, and I know we're running short of time, so I won't, but I think some important things is that I would like to leave the committee with is that, one, I think it was said earlier, we can't indict entire populations or entire facilities, because what it does when that happens, you have good people out there working very hard, it's demoralizing. And so we have to be careful on how we message those things. The same way we want our staff to message things to the inmates, then we need to be careful how we message things to our staff. And so I think that's a critical component to shifting and changing the culture within the organization. And just keep in mind that folks are at different levels within the organization, and we have to be able to both support, train, where necessary, hold accountable folks. But it's a holistic process that we want to use. And so for the sake of time, I'll end there, and if there's any questions about anything that we've done in the Division of Juvenile Justice, I'll be glad to answer.
I do have a quick question. First of all, I want to congratulate you and your staff because you did it. You made an institution that appears to work. The Prison Law Office terminated its lawsuit against DJJ, and the things that you've been talking about to us are really attitude things. Attitude is cheap. Attitude has something to do with the look in the eye when you talk to somebody. And I'm really interested in the fact that that seemed to work for you at GJJ. My question is, do you think this could be a usefully transmitted skill to adult institutions as well? I ask this in part because Stacy knows, we've talked about this, but when we did gender responsive training for the officers that were going to work in the women's correctional institutions, and then one of them turned into a men's institution but kept pretty much the same staff, and the male inmates commented on how nice the staff were and how you could actually talk to them, which, if you read the gender responsive training, has a lot of that kind of thing in it. So I'm just wondering if you could help us, if some of the techniques that worked for DJJ might also work in our adult institutions.